A vet saves a strange puppy in the rain. But when he dries it, he suddenly screams, "Call 911 now!" What looks like a soaked, harmless stray hides something terrifying, something no one in town is prepared for. As the storm rages, every second becomes more dangerous, and the truth behind this puppy threatens far more than one life. What has he really brought into his clinic? And will uncovering the secret save lives or destroy everything? I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Type it down below. And while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The windshield wipers fought against the downpour as Dr. Calder Hutton squinted through the grey sheets of rain. His truck's headlights cut weak paths through the storm, barely illuminating the country road ahead. Thunder cracked overhead, making him grip the steering wheel tighter. That's when he saw it. A small, muddy shape huddled in the middle of the road. His heart jumped as he slammed on the brakes, the truck's tires sliding slightly on the wet asphalt. "Dear Lord," he muttered, peering through the rain-streaked glass. A puppy, or what looked like one, trembled in his headlights, completely covered in mud and debris. Without hesitation, Calder grabbed his emergency kit from the passenger seat and jumped out into the deluge. Cold rain immediately soaked through his jacket as he approached the shivering animal. "Hey there, little one," he called softly, crouching down. The creature didn't run. Instead, it looked up at him with frightened eyes barely visible through the coating of mud. Calder quickly wrapped it in his jacket, cradling the small body against his chest as he hurried back to his truck. "Let's get you somewhere warm and dry," he said, carefully placing the bundle on the passenger seat. His clinic was just 2 miles ahead, and he pressed the accelerator, knowing every minute counted with a potentially hypothermic animal. The small-town veterinary clinic's lights were still on when he pulled up, his assistant Sarah waiting at the door. "Get the heat lamps ready," he called out as he rushed in, water dripping from his clothes. They moved quickly to the treatment room, where Sarah had already prepared warm towels and the heating equipment. Under the bright examination lights, Calder began gently cleaning away the layers of mud and grit coating the animal's fur. That's when the smell hit him, sharp and metallic, with an unmistakable garlic-like edge that made his nose burn. The animal suddenly went rigid, its body racked with spasms. Calder's eyes began to water, and his throat constricted with an alarming burning sensation. Years of emergency training kicked in. "Everyone out!" he bellowed, hitting the emergency alarm on the wall. "Sarah, call 911 now. Clear the building." His assistant's eyes went wide, but she didn't hesitate, running to evacuate the waiting room while dialing on her cell phone. Calder's lungs felt like they were on fire as he quickly carried the convulsing animal to an isolation cage, his mind racing. This wasn't any normal wet dog smell. This was something far more dangerous. Outside in the pounding rain, Calder took deep breaths of the clean air, his chest still burning. He directed his staff and the few clients to move further away from the building while he worked to set up temporary barriers. Years of emergency protocols guided his actions as he rigged up makeshift ventilation using tarps and equipment from his truck. Red and blue lights soon filled the parking lot as first responders arrived. Calder briefed the hazmat team between coughs, watching as they sealed off the treatment room and began their assessment. The rain continued to pour, but nobody seemed to notice anymore, too focused on the potential disaster unfolding. A familiar pickup truck skidded into the lot, and Tess Beaumont jumped out, her dark hair plastered to her face from the rain. Her sharp eyes took in the Tess Beaumont, seen as she jogged over to Calder. "What happened?" she demanded, professional concern evident in her voice. As the area's leading wildlife rehabilitator, she'd seen her share of emergencies, but the presence of hazmat suits suggested something far worse than usual. "Found what I thought was a puppy on the road," Calder explained, his voice still rough. "But something's very wrong. There's some kind of chemical reaction happening. The smell..." He broke off in a cough. Tess's face hardened with worry and focus. "Any idea what it might be?" "Not yet," Calder replied, watching as the hazmat team worked. "But I'm getting samples as soon as they clear the building. That smell, it was like garlic but metallic, and it burned like nothing I've ever encountered." He moved carefully around the perimeter of the building, checking the temporary ventilation setup he'd rigged. The rain had finally begun to slack off, but the air remained heavy with tension and uncertainty. With practiced efficiency, Calder documented everything he could remember about the incident, speaking into his phone's recorder. Chain of custody would be crucial if this turned out to be what he suspected. Not an accident, but something deliberately done to that animal. The puppy, Tess said suddenly, her voice tight. Did it survive? Calder shook his head grimly. I don't know. The hazmat team will check, but those convulsions. He left the sentence unfinished, his jaw clenching at the memory. Emergency vehicles continued to arrive, their lights painting the wet pavement in alternating colors. Calder stood with Tess under the overhang of his clinic's entrance, both of them watching the controlled chaos of the response team's work. Whatever this is, he said quietly, it was meant to hurt someone. No natural substance I know of produces that kind of reaction. Tess nodded, her expression grim. And using an animal as the delivery method, that's beyond cruel. The hazmat team leader approached them, his face serious behind his protective mask. Dr. Hutton, we've got preliminary readings. You made the right call evacuating. We're detecting phosphine gas, highly toxic stuff. Someone planted aluminum phosphide pellets on that animal. Calder's stomach turned. As a vet, he was familiar with phosphine's use in pest control, but this was something else entirely. This was deliberate poisoning, using an innocent creature as a weapon. He immediately began preparing the necessary documentation for the samples he would need, his mind already working through the procedures required for a proper investigation. Whatever was going on, he was determined to find out who was behind it, both for justice and to prevent it from happening again. The night stretched on, filled with the sounds of emergency radio chatter and the rustle of protective gear. And through it all, the question kept nagging at him: who would do this, and why? The answers, he suspected, would be even more disturbing than the night's events. The hazmat team worked methodically through the clinic, their protective suits gleaming under the emergency lights. Calder stood with Tess under the building's overhang, both watching intently as the team gave the all-clear signal for certain areas. Let's look at exactly what happened, Calder said, pulling out his phone to document everything. The coating on that animal wasn't natural mud. Tess nodded, her experienced eyes narrowing. Too uniform, like someone packed it on deliberately. She pulled her rain-soaked hair back into a tight ponytail, her movements quick and precise. What kind of chemicals are we dealing with here? Phosphine gas when the pellets got wet, Calder explained, his voice still rough from the exposure. It's used in agriculture, mostly for grain storage. But this, he gestured toward the clinic, this was weaponized. Wait, Tess said suddenly, her face tightening with recognition. I've been hearing things from the ranchers up on the ridge. Rumors about illegal predator control, missing animals. She turned to face Calder directly. Could this be connected? Before Calder could answer, his phone rang. The local emergency dispatcher's voice was tense. Dr. Hutton, we've got another case. Stock dog from the Miller rodeo string just collapsed. Same symptoms reported. Calder was already moving toward his truck. I'm on my way. Tell them not to approach the animal without protection. He glanced at Tess. Want to come? The drive to the Miller ranch was quick, but tense. They found the dog in the barn, its breathing labored. Calder worked carefully, using his experience to stabilize the animal while avoiding direct contact with any suspicious substances. Same signs, he muttered, documenting everything with his phone's camera. The metallic garlic smell, the convulsions. He looked at the ranch hand who'd found the dog. Was he near any strange animals? Anything unusual in his routine? The hand shook his head, clearly shaken. Just regular rounds of the property. But he was acting weird when he came back, all wobbly-like. Back at his truck, Calder filled out a sworn statement about the suspected poisoning, his handwriting precise despite his fatigue. 2 cases in one night. This isn't random. By morning, they were in the sheriff's office. Sheriff Martinez sat behind his desk, his expression carefully neutral as he reviewed Calder's report. This is a serious accusation, Dr. Hutton. We need to be careful about causing panic. 2 poisoned dogs isn't panic. It's pattern, Calder replied firmly. We need to investigate before more animals or people get hurt. The sheriff sighed, rubbing his temples. I can spare one investigator, Pike, he called out. Owen Pike limped into the office, his weathered face curious. Despite being retired, he still spent most days around the station, helping with cold cases and paperwork. His eyes were sharp as he studied Calder's report. Phosphine gas, Pike muttered. Nasty stuff. You got samples? Calder nodded, pulling out his phone to show the documentation. Full chain of custody. I can walk you through everything we've found. For the next hour, Calder and Tess detailed the night's events while Pike took careful notes, his experience showing in the questions he asked. When they finished, he stood up, grimacing slightly at his bad knee. We need to backtrack that first animal's route, he said, before the rain washes everything away. They drove to where Calder had first found the puppy, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds. Tess walked the area slowly, her trained eye picking out details others might miss. Hold on, she said suddenly, crouching down to study the partial tracks left in the mud. The gait pattern, the ear set from your photos. She looked up at Calder, her expression troubled. It was canid, all right, but something about the skull shape isn't adding up. This wasn't a domestic dog. Pike limped over to look at what she was seeing. What are you thinking? I'm not sure yet, Tess replied, taking pictures of the tracks. But whatever this is, someone's going to a lot of trouble to make it deadly. Calder watched as Pike and Tess documented the scene, their different areas of expertise complementing each other. The retired deputy's investigative experience, combined with Tess's wildlife knowledge, might be exactly what they needed to solve this. We've got 3 sets of expertise here, Pike said, straightening up with a grunt. Veterinary, wildlife, and investigation. We're going to need all of it. The trio spent the next few hours carefully mapping out the area, marking where tracks and other evidence might be found. The morning grew warmer, but none of them noticed, too focused on their grim task. Whatever's going on, Calder said, as they finished their initial survey. It's organized. The phosphine, the deliberate coating, using animals as carriers, this took planning. Tess nodded, her face serious as she reviewed her photos of the tracks. And knowledge of local wildlife patterns. These tracks show purpose. This animal was moving exactly where someone wanted it to go. Pike tucked his notebook away, his expression determined. Then we better figure out who that someone is, before they succeed at whatever they're planning. The morning mist clung low to the ground as Calder, Tess, and Owen followed the muddy tracks. Their boots squelched in the wet earth, leaving fresh impressions alongside the mysterious animal prints they were tracking. The trail led them steadily toward the sprawling Yarborough Range, its fence line visible in the distance. These tracks are deliberate, Owen noted, crouching despite his bad knee to examine a particularly clear print. Whatever this was, it wasn't just wandering. Tess hung back slightly, her face troubled. After several moments of internal debate, she spoke quietly. I need to tell you both something. I've had suspicions about Clint Yarborough for months now. She pulled out her phone, showing them documented dates and locations. There's been a pattern of dead predators on and around his land. Mountain lions, wolves, even protected species. No obvious cause of death, but Calder studied her notes carefully. Why haven't you reported this? No proof, she said, frustration clear in her voice. And Yarborough has too much influence. He chairs the county board, owns half the valley's water rights. People around here don't cross him lightly. Owen nodded grimly. Man's got more lawyers than cattle, and that's saying something. They continued following the tracks, with Calder meticulously photographing and documenting everything they found. Near a creek bed, he spotted something metallic glinting in the morning light. Look at this, he called the others over, pointing to rusted wire partially buried in the mud. Old bait station. And these marks here? He indicated. Scratches on the metal. Consistent with animal snares. Tess's expression darkened. Classic predator trap setup. Illegal as hell with protected species in the area. They followed a distinct runoff trail that led them to the mouth of an old water diversion tunnel, its concrete walls stained with age. Owen shined his flashlight inside, revealing scattered debris and more suspicious markings. This could be where they're storing the poison, he said. Out of sight, easy access. Before they could investigate further, Calder's phone buzzed. The message made his stomach drop. "Emergency county board meeting. They're reviewing my license." "What?" Tess exclaimed. "They can't do that." "They can try," Owen said grimly. "Yarborough's making his move." They rushed back to town, arriving at the county building just as the meeting was starting. The boardroom was packed, with Clint Yarborough himself sitting at the head table, his expensive boots crossed casually at the ankle. His lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an equally expensive suit, stood ready with a stack of documents. "Dr. Hutton," Yarborough drawled, his voice carrying easily across the room. "We're here to address some serious concerns about hazardous exposure at your clinic. Putting the public at risk, some might say." The lawyer stepped forward, papers rustling. "We have documentation here suggesting possible malpractice. The sheriff's office has been advised to proceed with extreme caution regarding any related investigations." Calder felt the pressure building in the room. His entire career, everything he'd built, was being threatened. But the evidence they'd found that morning was too important to ignore. Sheriff Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Given the sensitive nature of these allegations, we'll need to review any warrant requests very carefully. Could take weeks." "Weeks we don't have," Tess whispered fiercely. Outside after the meeting, Owen pulled them aside in the parking lot. Rain clouds were gathering again, dark and heavy with promise. "Listen," he said urgently. "They're trying to bury this in paperwork and procedure. We need to fight back with daylight and documentation. Every piece of evidence, every connection, everything bulletproof and by the book." Calder nodded, watching the storm clouds roll in. "Truth first, then hearings. We document everything, build a case they can't ignore. But we need to move fast," Tess added, glancing at the threatening sky. "That rain's going to wash away every track, every piece of evidence we haven't collected yet." Thunder rumbled in the distance as they stood there, the pressure of time bearing down on them as heavily as the approaching storm. Their window of opportunity was closing fast, but they couldn't afford to make mistakes. Not with Yarborough's legal team waiting to pounce on any misstep. "We need to get back out there," Calder said, checking his equipment. "Document everything we can before the rain hits. We do this right, by the book, but we do it now." The first fat drops of rain began to fall as they headed for their vehicles, each acutely aware of how much was at stake. Calder's professional reputation, the lives of countless animals, and the truth itself, all hanging in the balance as the storm clouds gathered overhead. Back at the clinic parking lot, Owen's weathered pickup truck rattled in, loaded with gear. He emerged carrying a scuffed metal case and what looked like old radio equipment. "Found my old evidence collection kit," he announced, setting the case down carefully. "And rigged up some basic comms. Not fancy, but they'll work." Calder examined the equipment with relief. Having proper tools would help ensure their investigation held up to scrutiny. "This is perfect, Owen. Thank you." A diesel engine rumbled, and they turned to see a mud-splattered SUV pull up. A broad-shouldered woman in work clothes stepped out, her face set in hard lines, her hands, scarred from years of working with animals, clenched into fists as she approached. "Delray Whitcomb," she introduced herself curtly. "Heard you're finally going after Yarborough." Tess stepped forward. "You're the hound trainer from up north, aren't you?" Delray nodded grimly. "Lost 3 of my best dogs along his fence lines last season. Found them just like that pup you brought in, Doc. Foaming, seizing." Her voice cracked slightly. "Nobody would investigate. Said there wasn't enough evidence." "There will be this time," Calder assured her, understanding the grief and anger in her stance. "We could use your help. You know the terrain? Like the back of my hand." Delray spread out a creased topographic map on the hood of Owen's truck. "Been watching those fence lines for months. I know every access point, every place they might plant bait." They gathered around the map as she pointed out key locations. The abandoned diversion tunnel was marked in red, along with several other spots where she'd found suspicious activity. "Here's what we need to do," Calder said, laying out their strategy. "Plant trail cameras near the tunnel and along these fence runs. That's where they'll have to come to refresh any bait stations. We stay within public easements. Document everything." Owen nodded approvingly. Smart. Can't challenge evidence if we play by the rules. They divided up equipment and assignments. Del Rey and Tess would handle the northern section, while Calder and Owen took the area nearest the tunnel. Dark clouds threatened overhead, but breaks in the weather gave them windows to work. Moving between rain squalls, they set their surveillance network. Calder showed everyone proper evidence collection procedure, wearing gloves, bagging samples, marking locations with GPS coordinates. Every suspicious mark or trace got photographed and logged. Greasy smears on fence posts, stray fibers caught on wire, disturbed soil patterns. "Look at this," Tess called, pointing to fresh tire tracks on an access road. They carefully flagged the location and took cast impressions before the next rain could wash them away. Del Rey worked with grim efficiency, her knowledge of the land proving invaluable. She guided them to hidden approaches the betas might use, spots where she'd found suspicious activity before. "My blue would have been 8 this spring," she said quietly while helping Calder position a camera. "Best tracking dog I ever trained. Found her right here, couldn't do anything to save her." She secured the camera with precise, angry movements. "This time we nail them." The shared purpose energized their efforts. Even as rain started falling again, they pressed on, determined to complete their surveillance network. Owen's communications equipment, though basic, allowed them to coordinate their movements and alert each other to promising finds. "If we catch them refreshing bait on camera, the sheriff will have to act," Owen said, adjusting an antenna. No way to explain that away. By late afternoon, they had 12 cameras in place, covering key approaches to the tunnel and suspicious sections of fence line. Calder's notebook was filled with careful observations, each one potentially critical to building their case. "We should check the footage daily," he said as they regrouped. "Someone setting out poison won't want to leave it unchecked for long." Tess nodded, checking her watch. "I need to get back to the rehab center. That pup needs attention, and I want to scan for a microchip once the power's stable." The storm had been causing outages across the county. "I'll help you set up proper ventilation," Calder offered. "We can't risk any more gas exposure." They drove to Tess's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center as evening approached. The facility was modest but well maintained, with separate areas for different species. Tess led them to a sturdy shed, where she'd prepared a special enclosure. "Modified the ventilation system," she explained, showing Calder. "The extra fans and filters she'd installed. Should be safe now." The animal lay quietly in its crate, still weak but breathing steadily. Calder checked its vital signs while Tess prepared the microchip scanner. "Power's still unstable," she said, watching lights flicker. "We'll have to wait on the scan, but at least it's comfortable and secure for now." Thunder rolled overhead as they finished securing the shed. Despite the weather and the challenges ahead, their coordinated efforts had given them all a sense of cautious hope. They had a plan, they had evidence collection underway, and most importantly, they had each other. Del Rey took a final look at their surveillance setup on the map. "We'll catch them," she said with quiet certainty. "This time, we'll catch them." The first rays of sunlight had barely touched the horizon when Owen's phone buzzed with camera alerts. Huddled in his truck with coffee going cold, he downloaded the footage and let out a low whistle. The images were crystal clear. A Yarborough ranch foreman, moving with practiced efficiency in the pre-dawn gloom, laying out what looked like meat near the tunnel mouth. Owen immediately called Calder. "Got him. Clear as day. Timestamp and all. You need to see this." Within 20 minutes, they gathered around Owen's laptop. The footage showed the foreman. They recognized him as Mike Denton, carefully placing what appeared to be treated bait. His movements were deliberate, practiced. "Look at how he's handling it," Tess pointed out. "He's wearing thick gloves. He knows exactly what he's doing." Calder studied the footage carefully. "This is exactly what we needed. Time-stamped, clear identification, obvious intent." Owen was already dialing the sheriff's office. "Jim? Yeah, it's Pike. We've got solid evidence. Video footage of Denton laying poison bait. Clear enough to read his name tag." He listened for a moment, his expression hardening. "No, this can't wait. You need to see this now." The sheriff arrived 45 minutes later, looking uncomfortable but duty-bound. He watched the footage 3 times, asking pointed questions about camera placement and chain of custody. Finally, he sighed heavily. "All right, I'll bring him in for questioning, but this stays quiet until we know more." Owen insisted on riding along. "I know how these conversations go, Jim. You might need a witness." They found Denton at the ranch, already starting his morning rounds. The arrest was quiet, professional, but word spread fast in small towns. By mid-morning, the entire county knew Yarborough's foreman was in custody. Hope surged through their small team. "Maybe this breaks it open," Tess said, helping Calder organize his documentation. One person talking could bring the whole thing down. But Victory's sweet taste turned bitter by 10 o'clock. Dr. Stuart Penn swept into Calder's clinic like a storm front, flanked by 2 county officers. His tailored suit seemed out of place among the rural clinic's practical furnishings. He held up an official document with an air of smug satisfaction. "This is a public safety seizure order," Penn announced, his voice carrying through the waiting room. "We're taking custody of all medical records and research materials related to the recent chemical exposure incident." Calder stood his ground. "Those records contain privileged information about my patients, which is why we're handling this officially." Penn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We can't have potentially contaminated evidence compromising public health, can we?" The officers began boxing up files while Penn supervised. They took everything: patient records, research notes, sample documentation, even Calder's personal notebooks. Clients in the waiting room watched in shocked silence. "This is harassment," Calder said firmly. "These records are protected." "File a complaint," Penn suggested smoothly. "After your suspension hearing, of course." By early afternoon, the damage was done. Somehow, their surveillance plans had been leaked to local media. Yarborough's defense attorney was already spinning the narrative, describing reckless vigilante actions and harassment of legitimate agricultural operations. The sheriff called Owen, his tone apologetic but firm, had to release Denton, his lawyers arguing entrapment, unauthorized surveillance, without a warrant for those cameras. He paused. "I can't push for more warrants without absolutely solid cause." This got messy fast. Calder sat in his now emptied office, staring at the gaps where his files had been. The phone hadn't rung in hours. Word of his suspension was already spreading. Years of building trust in the community seemed to be evaporating. Tess found him there as evening approached. She pulled up a chair and sat quietly beside him for a moment. "They're trying to bury the truth," she said finally. "But truth doesn't need anyone's permission to be true." Calder nodded slowly. "I know, but right now, the truth feels awfully lonely." "You're not alone," Tess said firmly. "We've got the footage. We've got samples. They can't erase what we know. They can make it awfully hard to prove it, though." Calder gestured at his empty filing cabinets. "Penn's got all our documentation now, and I guarantee those records won't see daylight again until they've been thoroughly sanitized." "So we start fresh," Tess insisted. "We've got copies of the important stuff. Owen's got the camera footage backed up 6 ways from Sunday. They can't stop us from collecting more evidence." Calder managed a slight smile, but his eyes remained troubled. The ground beneath their investigation felt increasingly unstable. Every move they made seemed to be anticipated and countered. Someone was always one step ahead. "We knew they'd fight back," Tess reminded him. "Big ranchers like Yarborough, they're used to getting their way, but that doesn't make them right." Calder stood and walked to the window, watching the last clients hurry to their cars, avoiding eye contact with the clinic. The suspension wouldn't be official until the review board met, but the damage was already spreading through the community like poison in a stream. "What happens to the animals if I can't practice?" he asked quietly. "We'll figure it out," Tess said, "one step at a time. Right now, we focus on what we can prove, what they can't take away from us." Owen appeared in the doorway, his weathered face set in determined lines. "Just got word. Penn's office is processing our evidence as hazardous materials. Everything's being quarantined." "Convenient," Calder said bitterly. "But not surprising," Owen added. "Men like Penn, they play the long game. They know how to bury things in red tape until people lose interest." The 3 of them sat in the gathering darkness of Calder's office, each lost in thought. Outside, the normal evening traffic moved past, but fewer cars than usual turned into the clinic's lot. The phone remained silent. "We're not done," Tess said finally, breaking the heavy silence. "Not by a long shot." Calder nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. The truth was still out there, waiting to be proven. But for now, the path forward seemed covered in shadows, each step uncertain. The rain drummed against the metal roof of Tess's rehabilitation shed, a steady roar that had become the soundtrack of their investigation. She fumbled with her keys in the pre-dawn darkness, her fingers cold and clumsy. The generator had finally kicked back in after the storm, and she was eager to scan the mysterious animal for a microchip that might help identify its origins. Lightning flashed, illuminating the pathway as she approached the shed door. Something felt wrong. The air held an emptiness she couldn't explain. With trembling hands, she pushed the door open. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The crate lay in ruins, wooden splinters scattered across the concrete floor. Where their key evidence should have been, there was only empty space and the lingering scent of wet fur. Tess grabbed her phone, hitting Calder's number with shaking fingers. "Someone took it," she said when he answered. "The animal. It's gone." 20 minutes later, Calder stood in the shed, examining the broken crate while rain continued its relentless assault outside. His face was drawn with exhaustion and worry. "The locks weren't forced," he observed, running his fingers along the intact padlock. "Whoever did this either had a key or knew exactly what they were doing." Tess paced the small space. "I checked everything twice last night. The ventilation, the security." She stopped suddenly. "The only people who knew it was here were us and—" "Someone close," Calder finished, his stomach sinking. The leak wasn't just about the investigation anymore. Someone knew exactly where to hit us. They began retracing their steps, checking the perimeter of the property. The rain had turned the ground to mud, obscuring any clear tracks. Calder called Owen while Tess searched the roadside ditches, hoping against hope that the animal might have simply escaped. Owen arrived within the hour, his truck's headlights cutting through the grey morning. He looked grim as he surveyed the scene. "Del Rey called me just before you did," he said. "She was up early checking her kennels. Says she saw one of Yarbra's ranch trucks creeping past around dawn. No lights." Tess kicked at a fallen branch in frustration. Our whole case was building around that animal. The poison traces, the handling marks, everything. "The timing's not a coincidence," Calder said quietly. "Right after Penn seized our records, right after my suspension, they gathered under the shed's overhang, rain dripping from their jackets. The momentum they'd built over the past days felt like it was washing away with the storm." "Wait," Tess said suddenly. "Last night, before the power went out, I started scanning for a microchip. The reader only got a partial code before everything went dark, but I wrote it down." She pulled out a soggy notebook, flipping to a page with hurriedly scrawled numbers. Owen leaned in, squinting at the smudged writing. "That could be something. I know where there's an old handheld scanner in the evidence locker. If I can get 10 minutes alone in there." "Can you?" Calder asked. "After everything that's happened?" Owen's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "Been working those halls for 30 years. Know every shift change, every camera blind spot. Just need to pick my moment." Tess clutched her notebook tighter. "Even a partial ID could help us trace where the animal came from. Who might have handled it before?" "Before Yarbra's people got hold of it," Calder finished. They spent the next hour canvassing the nearby roads, but the rain had erased any useful signs. Del Rey joined them, her face tight with anger as she described the ranch truck she'd spotted. Dark-colored, mud-spattered, moving like it was trying not to be noticed. "Same as when my dogs were hit," she said bitterly. "Always at dawn, always when they think no one's watching." The morning grew lighter, but the rain continued its steady fall. Calder felt the weight of his suspension pressing down, keeping him from taking official action. Every avenue they'd carefully built seemed to be closing off. Tess hadn't stopped moving since discovering the break-in, as if constant motion could ward off the despair threatening to settle in. "We can't let them win like this," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "They can't just keep poisoning animals and covering it up." "They won't," Calder assured her, though his own confidence felt shaky. We've still got the camera footage, the samples we collected. Unless Penn's office declares those hazardous too, Owen growled. Give me till tonight. I'll get that scanner. See what we can learn from the chip. Number. They gathered their wet gear and prepared to separate, each heading to their assigned tasks for the day. The rain was finally beginning to slack off, but the sky remained heavy and dark. Be careful, Calder told Owen. They're watching everything now. Owen nodded grimly. Always am. 30 years of watching my back taught me something. As they drove away from the shed, Tess stared out the window at the empty crate through the rain-streaked glass. Their key piece of evidence, their strongest link to proving Yarborough's crimes, had vanished like morning mist. The setback cut deep, threatening to unravel everything they'd worked for. But in her pocket, the notebook with its partial chip number felt like a lifeline, a thread of hope they couldn't afford to lose. They just had to hold on, keep pushing forward, even when the path seemed darkest. Owen arrived at Calder's darkened clinic just after midnight, his old truck rolling silently into the back lot. He carried a battered metal case, its edges worn smooth from years of use. Inside the clinic's back office, Calder and Tess waited anxiously. Had to time it perfect, Owen said, setting the case down carefully. Rookie working evidence tonight always takes his coffee break at 11:45 sharp. The scanner looked ancient, its grey plastic housing scratched and faded. But when Owen powered it up, green lights flickered to life across its display. Still works? Tess asked, already pulling out her rain-spotted notebook. These old models were built solid, Owen said. Plus, they never bothered upgrading the evidence room equipment. Budget cuts, you know. Calder watched as Tess carefully read out the partial numbers she'd managed to log before the power failed. Owen's weathered fingers tapped them into the scanner's keypad. Even a partial sequence might help narrow things down, Owen explained. These chips store standardized codes, region, facility, individual ID. The device hummed as it searched its database. Seconds stretched into minutes. Tess paced the small office while Calder stared at the blinking cursor. Suddenly, the scanner chirped. Owen's eyes widened as he read the display. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. What is it? Calder moved closer. This isn't just some stray, Owen said. According to this, your puppy is part of a federal wolf dog recovery program. There's been a pack moving through this region, trying to re-establish territory. Tess stopped pacing. Protected wolves? Are you sure? Chip doesn't lie. Owen turned the display so they could see. These prefix codes? Special designation for endangered species tracking. Calder felt the pieces starting to click together. That's why the skull structure looked off to you, Tess. It wasn't fully domestic. And why someone would go to such lengths to get rid of it, Tess added. Her face darkened with realization. If there are protected wolves in the area. Development restrictions kick in, Calder finished. Protected habitat means federal oversight. Which brings us to Yarborough, Owen said grimly. Man's been talking up some big plans lately. Tess nodded quickly. I've heard rumors. He wants to divert water from the old creek bed, run it through that abandoned mine tunnel we found tracks near. Water rights, Calder said, if he controls the flow. He controls everything, Tess confirmed. His ranch, plus all those luxury cabins he's been promising investors. But he can't do any of it if there are wolves to protect. The scope of what they were uncovering made Calder's stomach turn. So, the poisoned strays we've been finding. Cover, Owen growled. Kill enough regular dogs, and nobody looks twice when a wolf turns up dead. Just another tragic accident. Tess was already pulling up maps on her tablet. Look at this. The old mine tunnel runs right under where most of the poisonings have happened. It's the perfect distribution point. Calder studied the layout, his veterinary training spinning terrible possibilities. Those phosphide pellets we found, in a confined space like that tunnel, with enough water. What? Tess asked. It becomes a gas chamber, Calder explained. One good storm, dump enough pellets in the spillway, and the whole area fills with phosphine gas. Any animal within range. Or person, Owen added darkly. And In the panic afterward, Tess continued, who'd question emergency measures to protect public safety? Yarborough could push through whatever water controls he wanted. The revelation left them silent for a long moment, the enormity of the threat sinking in. What had started as suspicious animal deaths now pointed to something far more sinister. We need to move fast, Owen finally said, before the next big storm hits. But carefully, Calder cautioned. If Yarborough realizes we know about the wolves, he'll accelerate his timeline, Tess finished. Maybe skip straight to the end game. They huddled around the maps, marking key points, the mine entrance, water flow patterns, likely bait sites. The stakes had grown far beyond what any of them had initially imagined. I'll update my contact at Fish and Wildlife, Tess said. The wolf angle gives them jurisdiction. And I've got a few old friends in the EPA, Owen added. Water contamination gets their attention quick. Calder studied the scan results again, the simple string of numbers that had blown the case wide open. A protected wolf, deliberately poisoned to clear the way for development. The evidence was there. They just had to prove it before Yarborough could act. We document everything, he said firmly. Every connection, every detail. No loose ends this time. Thunder rolled in the distance as they worked, marking the approach of another storm. Time was running out, and they all knew it. But now they understood what they were really fighting, not just for animals, but for the safety of the entire region. The old scanner sat on the desk, its green display still showing the wolf's ID code. One small piece of technology had revealed a conspiracy that could devastate their community. Now they had to stop it, before Yarborough's greed claimed any more victims. Calder stared at the suspension notice on his clinic door, the official seal mocking his years of dedicated service. But paperwork couldn't suspend his determination. Inside his small office, he gathered the team around a makeshift planning board. They've taken my license, but they can't take what we know, he said, pinning up a map of the water system. Yarborough's not done. He needs chaos to justify seizing control of the water supply. Tess leaned forward, her fingers tracing the blue lines that marked the water flow. The school reservoir would be perfect for his plan, one contamination scare involving kids. And parents will demand immediate action, Owen finished, his weathered face grim. No one would question emergency measures then. Del Rey, who had been quietly studying the terrain markers, spoke up. He'll blame it on wildlife, say those wolves we found are bringing disease into populated areas. Exactly, Calder agreed. Which is why we need to force his timing, make him move before he's ready. He pulled out a draft press release, carefully worded to catch attention. We're going to announce a meeting with a federal wildlife agent, someone who supposedly has all the tracking data for the wolf recovery program. Bait, Owen said with a knowing nod. Make him think we're about to expose everything. If he believes we have proof of the wolves' protected status, he'll have to act before that meeting, Tess added, catching on. He can't risk federal involvement. Del Rey straightened her worn jacket. I know every back road to that reservoir. My people can watch the approaches, radio, if we spot movement. Good, Calder said. Owen, can you coordinate the surveillance? We need eyes on every possible access. Point. Already got some old buddies who owe me favors, Owen replied. They'll help, no questions asked. Tess pulled out her laptop. I'm drafting a statement about Dr. Penn. His investment ties to Yarborough's development projects, the consulting fees, everything. If anything happens, we release it to every news outlet in the state. That'll keep him from interfering, Calder agreed. He won't risk his reputation once the spotlight's on him. They worked through the afternoon, mapping routes and organizing shifts. Calder spent hours in his workshop, modifying an old livestock trailer. He installed ventilation systems and reinforced the frame, creating a mobile shield they could position upwind of any gas release. It's not pretty, he explained to Tess as she helped him test the seals, but it'll give us a safe space to work from if things go bad. You really think he'll try something at the reservoir? She asked, worry creasing her forehead. It's his best play, Calder replied. One contamination incident, trace amounts of phosphine detected in the water, and he can push through any emergency measures he wants. Del Rey arrived with maps marked with her watchers' positions. Got people posted here, And here, she indicated, nobody gets near that water without us knowing. Owen checked his modified radio setup. I've got channels assigned to each sector. First sign of movement, we'll know. They gathered around Tess's laptop to review the press release one final time. The wording was careful, just enough detail about the federal agent to seem credible, just enough hint about the tracking data to set off alarms. Send it, Calder said. Let's see how fast Yarborough reacts. Tess hit send, and they watched the announcement go live on local news sites. The trap was set. Now we wait, Owen said quietly. Calder nodded, studying their preparations. They had done everything possible to prepare, to anticipate Yarborough's moves. The modified trailer stood ready, their communication network was in place, and Del Rey's watchers were positioned. Whatever happens, he told the team, we stick to the plan. We can't match Yarborough's influence, but we can outsmart him. Make him show his hand. They dispersed to their positions, each carrying a piece of the strategy. Tess's damaging statement about Penn waited in dozens of pre-addressed emails, ready to launch. Del Rey's network of observers settled in for their watch. Owen checked his radio connections one final time. Calder walked the perimeter of his clinic, no longer his base of operations, but still a symbol of what they were fighting for. The suspension notice fluttered in the evening breeze, but it didn't matter anymore. They had moved beyond official channels, beyond paperwork and procedures. Now it was a race against time and greed, with the safety of their entire community at stake. The pieces were in place. They just had to wait for Yarborough to make his move. The morning after their announcement brought an unexpected stillness. Calder sat at his kitchen table, scanning local news sites and weather reports while nursing his third cup of coffee. His phone hadn't rung once, a stark contrast to the chaos of recent days. Yarborough's gone dark, Owen reported over speakerphone. Not a peep from his office, his lawyer, nobody. Tess, who had arrived early to help monitor communications, leaned toward the phone. His foreman lawyered up fast after the detention. Wouldn't even look at the sheriff anymore. That's something, Calder said, scrolling through another weather update. The pressure readings from upstream made him uneasy. The publicity's making them nervous. Del Rey's voice crackled through Owen's connection. Sheriff's people are being mighty friendly to my watchers. Drove past 3 times last night. Just nodded and kept going. He's covering his bases, Owen explained. Nobody wants to be on the wrong side if this blows up. I worked with him long enough to know he can smell when the wind's changing. Calder pushed away from the table and walked to his window. The sky hung heavy and grey, promising more rain. He'd been tracking the reservoir levels hourly. The spillway was already straining under the water pressure from previous storms. It feels like progress, Tess said softly, coming to stand beside him. Like maybe we've actually slowed them down. He wanted to share her optimism. The sudden quiet from Yarborough's camp could mean their gambit had worked, that the threat of federal involvement and public exposure had forced them to reconsider. But something didn't sit right. Del Rey, he called back to the phone. Any movement on the ridgeline? Nothing unusual. Some ranch hands moving cattle to higher ground, but that's normal with this weather coming. Calder unfolded his wind chart, comparing it to the latest forecast. Owen, how's the schedule looking for tomorrow's meeting? All set. Got the community center booked for 2 o'clock. Already had 3 reporters called to confirm. Tess smiled. Our fictional federal agent is causing quite a stir. They had carefully crafted the illusion, a wildlife official supposedly arriving with tracking data that would prove the wolf dog's protected status. The meeting announcement was deliberately vague about details while hinting at revelatory evidence. Let's run through positions again, Calder said, spreading out their marked-up map. Owen, you'll be in the parking lot with the communications hub? Yep. Got clear sight lines to all approaches and the emergency frequency ready if needed. Del Rey? High point on the ridge. Can see both access roads and the spillway from there. Got 4 of my people spread out with radios. Tess traced their planned route with her finger. Calder and I will arrive together, playing up the anticipation about meeting the agent. If Yarborough takes the bait, he'll have to move before we can present any evidence. The trailer's ready? Owen asked. Parked behind the community center, Calder confirmed. Ventilation system tested. Emergency gear loaded. If we detect any gas release, we have an upwind safe zone. They had rehearsed their roles repeatedly, but Calder kept finding details to double-check. The stakes were too high for mistakes. Even this apparent lull felt dangerous, like the deceptive quiet before a storm breaks. "New weather alert," Tess announced, checking her phone. "Flash flood warning extended through tomorrow night. They're expecting another 3 to 5 inches. Calder studied the spillway diagram again. That much rain will push the system to capacity. If someone wanted to create a contamination crisis, the timing would be perfect. "But we've got eyes everywhere," Del Rey insisted. "No way they can move enough material to poison the reservoir without us seeing." "Unless they already have," Owen said quietly. "Could have staged equipment during the confusion when they grabbed the wolf dog." The possibility hung heavy in the room. They had been so focused on preventing future actions, they hadn't considered preparations might already be complete. Still, for this brief moment, they had achieved something. Yarborough's aggressive pressure campaign had stalled. The sheriff's tacit cooperation with their watchers suggested official attitudes were shifting. Even the local press seemed more interested in investigating than accepting the party line about public safety concerns. "We stick to the plan," Calder said firmly. "Keep the pressure on, maintain our positions, and be ready to move if anything changes. Right now, the possibility of exposure is our strongest weapon." Tess nodded, pulling up the draft of their revelation package, all the evidence they'd gathered, ready to release if needed. Penn's connections to the development deals, the falsified environmental impact studies, everything. One button push and it all goes public. "How's the clinic?" Del Rey asked gently. Calder managed a small smile. "Still suspended, still empty. But that doesn't matter right now. We focus on preventing whatever they're planning. My license can wait." Owen's voice carried years of experience. Sometimes you have to lose something to save something bigger. They spent the next hour refining communications protocols and backup plans. The quiet from Yarborough's camp still felt wrong, but they had done everything possible to prepare. Their gambit had bought them time and shifted some power dynamics in their favor. As the others left to check their positions and equipment, Calder found himself standing alone at his window again. The rain was starting, fat drops marking patterns on the glass. Somewhere out there, a protected wolf dog was still missing, and a man like Yarborough was weighing options and consequences. Tomorrow's meeting loomed as a deadline for both sides. For one fragile moment, it seemed possible they might reach it with their strategy intact and no further casualties. But the rising water and lowering sky carried warnings Calder couldn't ignore. They had planned carefully, moved deliberately, and created leverage where they could. Now they would see if it was enough. The storm clouds broke open with angry intensity just as Calder's phone buzzed. His stomach dropped at Owen's tone. Tess never made it to the checkpoint. Calder's hands went cold. "What do you mean?" "Found her truck on County Road 8. Engine running, door wide open, phone on the seat. No sign of struggle, but..." Owen's voice cracked. "I got access to the traffic camera feed. It's bad, Calder." Calder gripped his desk until his knuckles went white. "Show me." Minutes later, they huddled around Owen's laptop in the clinic's back office. The grainy footage showed a ranch flatbed pulling alongside Tess's idling truck. A figure emerged, knife glinting in the rain. Tess was forced into the flatbed's cab, her expression a mix of fury and fear. In the truck bed, they could make out a familiar crate, the missing wolf dog, and several large barrels marked "Fumigant" in bold letters. "Phosphide," Calder whispered, his medical training calculating terrible possibilities. In this rain, those barrels could turn the whole spillway into a gas chamber. Del Rey's voice crackled over their emergency radio. "Movement on the service road. Tile lights heading up toward the dam. They're taking the back way." Owen spread out a map, his former deputy's instincts kicking in. "Here's what we know. They need height to maximize contamination. The dam spillway gives them that. But they'll avoid main roads and cameras." Calder traced likely routes with a shaking finger. "This maintenance track. Steep but direct. No surveillance. Matches where Del Rey spotted them," Owen confirmed. He looked at Calder soberly. You know you have no official standing here. Your license is suspended. I don't care. Calder was already moving, gathering equipment. Tess is up there, and if those barrels rupture… He couldn't finish the thought. Racing to his truck, Calder's mind clicked through necessities. The modified livestock trailer was their best defense. Its ventilation system could create a safe zone if gas was released. He hitched it with practiced moves, then tossed in rescue rope, bolt cutters, and emergency medical supplies. The rain hammered his windshield as he navigated the slick roads. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolling across the valley like artillery fire. Through his earpiece, Owen coordinated their scattered allies. Delray, maintain visual if you can. Sheriff's units are moving to block the lower access points, but they're 15 minutes out minimum. Copy that. Rain's getting worse up here. Water's really pushing through the spillway now. Calder's truck fought for traction on the steep service road. In his mind, he saw Tess's face from the security footage. Who that flash of defiance, even with a Tess's face, knife at her throat. She would fight smart, create opportunities. He had to be ready. The radio crackled. Movement at the upper gate, Delray reported. They're stopping. 2 figures out of the cab. They're manhandling something from the truck bed. The barrels? Owen asked. Can't tell. The rain's a solid wall up here. Calder's hands tightened on the wheel. The trailer swayed behind him as he navigated another switchback. His headlights caught the glint of chain link, the upper gate. Fresh tire tracks cut through the mud. I'm at the gate, he reported. Bolt cutters ready. Be careful, Owen warned. If they see you coming, I know. Calder was already out in the downpour, attack plan forming. The trailer's ventilation system would create a pressurized safe zone. If he could get Tess inside before they breached the barrels, the lock yielded to his bolt cutters. He eased the gate open just wide enough to slip his truck through. Ahead, the service road curved toward the dam's massive concrete face. Somewhere in that rain-swept darkness, Tess needed him, and the wolf dog, and everyone downstream if those barrels of poison ruptured. His suspension, his career, none of it mattered now. There was only this moment, this purpose. The rain lashed his face as he drove higher, into the heart of the storm. Through the curtain of water, emergency lights began to flash. The spillway gates were opening automatically, responding to the rising flood. Time was running out. Through sheets of rain, Calder grabbed his handheld radio. His fingers, slick with water, fumbled with the dial. Owen, do you copy? Here, Owen's voice crackled through static. Got Sarah at dispatch. She's willing to log a hazard report without alerting Penn, but we're on our own otherwise. Perfect. Calder pulled out a small weather meter, checking wind direction. The display flickered in the downpour. Wind's coming from the northwest. We have to approach from that side or the gas will knock us out before we can help anyone. Delray's voice cut through. Visual confirmation on the flatbed. They're in the overflow parking area, about 50 yards from the main spillway controls. 2 figures moving equipment. Calder's mind raced through calculations. Phosphine gas was heavier than air. It would sink and flow downhill with the rain. They needed high ground and moving air. Owen, what's your position? 1/4 mile behind you. Got the emergency sluice operator's number. 1 call and we can start lowering the water level. The dam access road appeared ahead, half submerged in floodwater. Calder downshifted, using the livestock trailer as a windbreak against the strengthening gusts. Water sprayed up past his windows as the truck pushed through. Delray, maintain eyes on the suspects but stay clear. If those barrels rupture, get to high ground immediately. Copy that. They're moving something toward the catwalk. Can't make out if it's Tess or the wolf dog. Lightning split the sky, followed instantly by deafening thunder. The storm was directly overhead now. Calder could barely hear Owen's next transmission. Splitting up. I'll secure the lot and contact the sluice operator. You find Tess and the catwalk controls. Understood. Calder parked the truck at an angle, creating a protective barrier with the trailer. He grabbed his emergency kit and a powerful flashlight. Remember, upwind approach only. We can't help anyone if we're unconscious. The roar of water through the spillway was overwhelming. Millions of gallons per minute, racing through concrete channels. The sound vibrated in Calder's chest as he moved forward, keeping low. Another lightning strike illuminated the scene in stark detail. The catwalk stretched across the face of the dam, like a metal spiderweb. Below it, white water churned through the gates. One mistake, one slip in this rain, and the fall would be fatal. Calder focused on his priorities. Lower the water levels. Stop them from dumping the poison. Find Tess. Simple goals to anchor his racing thoughts. His radio squealed. Movement on the upper catwalk, Del Rey reported. They're positioning something near the center span. Can you see Tess? Negative. Too much rain. Owen's voice cut in. Sluice operator is starting emergency procedures. Water level should start dropping in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Calder looked up at the maze of catwalks above him. 10 minutes might as well be 10 years, but he had no choice. He moved toward the access ladder, keeping the wind at his back. The metal rungs were slick with rain. Each step had to be deliberate, tested. The wind tried to tear him loose. Lightning flashed again, and for a moment, he saw two figures on the upper level, struggling with what looked like a barrel. His radio crackled once more. Calder. Owen's voice was urgent. They're moving faster. Something spooked them. He climbed faster, fighting for each handhold. The rain felt like needles against his face. Every movement was a battle between speed and survival. One wrong step here would end everything. The water's roar grew louder as he ascended. Somewhere above him, Tess was facing these same conditions, but without choice or protection. The thought drove him upward, past exhaustion, past fear. He had to reach her, had to stop them, had to keep breathing, one rung at a time, one decision at a time. Into the storm. Thunder cracked overhead as Calder reached the upper catwalk. Through curtains of rain, he saw them. Clint Yarborough's bulk towering over Tess, dragging her toward the railing. The wolfdog's crate rattled violently beside two metal barrels, their warning labels barely visible in the storm. Heavy rope lashed them together, ready for a coordinated dump. Calder's heart hammered against his ribs. He crouched behind the livestock trailer he'd positioned as a windbreak, calculating angles. The rescue line felt heavy in his hands as he clipped it to the nearest catwalk strut, testing the connection twice. "Let her go, Yarborough," Calder's voice carried over the storm. Yarborough's laugh was ugly. "Or what, Doc? You're suspended, remember? No authority here." Tess struggled against Yarborough's grip, her eyes meeting Calder's. Despite her situation, he saw steel there, not fear. She was waiting for an opening. Calder keyed his radio. "Owen now, open the emergency sluice." The response was immediate. Far below, massive gates groaned open. The water's roar changed pitch as the level began to drop, inch by precious inch. "You're too late," Yarborough shouted. "One barrel hits that water, and the whole valley gets a wake-up call about dangerous wildlife. The board will have to act." He yanked Tess closer to the edge. The metal grating shuddered beneath their feet as the storm intensified. Calder edged forward, keeping tension on the line, watching Yarborough's boots for signs of his next move. Lightning split the sky. In that frozen moment, Tess made her move. She drove her elbow back hard into Yarborough's solar plexus, twisting to break his grip. But the wet grating betrayed her. Her feet slipped out from under her. Calder didn't think. He launched forward, rescue line already playing out. Tess went over the rail, a scream torn away by the wind. The line snapped taut in Calder's hands, nearly yanking him off his feet. Pain shot through his shoulders and arms as his tendons took the strain. "I've got you," he shouted. "Hold on." A new smell cut through the rain. Sharp, metallic, like rotten garlic. Phosphine gas. One of the barrels must have leaked. Calder's eyes began to burn, his lungs seizing. Through watering eyes, he saw Yarborough stumble back, coughing. The nearest barrel shifted on its makeshift brace, threatening to topple. If it hit the water now, the resulting gas cloud would be catastrophic. Still holding Tess's line with one hand, Calder lunged forward, his boot connected with the barrel's side, sending it spinning off into empty air, away from the water. "Pull me up," Tess called from below. "Hurry!" Calder braced himself, hauling on the line. His muscles screamed in protest. Each inch felt like a mile. Yarborough had recovered now, rage twisting his features into something inhuman. "You're ruining everything," he roared, charging forward. Calder couldn't dodge, not while holding Tess's line. The impact slammed him against the railing. Stars burst behind his eyes. His grip on the line started to slip. "No!" He locked his fingers tighter, even as Yarborough's weight crushed him against the metal rail. The flood snarled below, hungry for mistakes. Tess's hand appeared over the railing, then her head and shoulders. She pulled herself up as Calder and Yarborough grappled. The catwalk swayed dangerously under their combined weight. "The wolf dog!" Tess gasped, crawling to safety. "The crate's breaking!" Another lightning strike illuminated the scene. 3 figures locked in desperate struggle, the remaining barrel wobbling dangerously, and a terrified animal fighting to escape its splintering prison. The phosphine gas swirled around them, making every breath a battle. The wind howled, drowning out individual voices. Rain hammered the metal, grating like bullets. And still the water thundered below, promising consequences for any misstep in this deadly dance. Yarborough's hands found Calder's throat. Spots danced in his vision as he fought for air. The railing pressed against his lower back, cold and implacable. One good shove would send him over. Through the chaos, he heard Owen's voice on the radio. "Water level dropping. Hold on." The 3 of them remained locked together. Yarborough pushing, Calder resisting, Tess trying to break the rancher's grip. The storm raged around them, indifferent to the struggle that would determine so many fates. The rain pounded against the catwalk as Calder strained to pull Tess up. Her fingers gripped the metal, railing, knuckles white with effort. With one final heave, he helped her scramble onto the grating. She collapsed against him, gasping for air, her clothes completely soaked. "I've got you," he panted, holding her steady. "You're safe now." Behind them, Yarborough lunged forward, but his wet boots betrayed him on the slick metal. His feet shot out from under him, and he pitched toward the churning water below. Without thinking, Calder released Tess and dove for him, catching Yarborough's arm just as he went over the edge. "Give me your other hand!" Calder shouted over the storm. Despite everything this man had done, he couldn't let him fall. For a moment, Yarborough's eyes went wide with genuine fear. Then survival instinct took over, and he reached up with his free hand. Calder braced himself against the railing and pulled with everything he had left. Yarborough's weight threatened to drag them both over, but Tess grabbed Calder's belt from behind, anchoring him. Together, they hauled the rancher back onto the catwalk. He lay there, panting and coughing from the phosphine fumes that still swirled around them. Before he could recover, Calder rolled him onto his stomach. "Owen's cuffs," Tess said, pulling a zip tie from her pocket. She must have grabbed them earlier, just in case. Calder secured Yarborough's wrists behind his back, cinching the plastic tight. "You're under arrest," he said, though he had no actual authority to make it official. "Stop fighting. It's over." In the distance, sirens pierced through the storm's roar. Red and blue lights reflected off the rain-slicked metal of the dam structure. Help was finally coming. "You can't prove anything," Yarborough spat, but his voice wavered. Tess moved to check on the wolf dog's crate, while Calder kept Yarborough pinned. The animal had stopped thrashing and now huddled beneath a tarp that had partially blown over its cage, seeking shelter from the rain. Owen's voice crackled over the radio. "Hazmat's moving! In. You all okay up there?" "We're alive," Calder responded, his throat raw from the gas. "Yarborough's secured. Get those barrels neutralized." Professional emergency responders swarmed the scene. Hazmat technicians in full protective gear carefully approached the remaining barrel, working methodically to contain and neutralize the deadly phosphine. The rain helped disperse the fumes, but everyone kept their distance until the all-clear was given. Owen appeared on the catwalk, evidence bags in hand. He worked quickly, collecting rope fibers from where the barrels had been tied down. "Same braiding pattern as the tunnel footage," he noted, holding up a strand. "And look at this." He pointed to a serial number stamped on the barrel's side. "Traced to a shell company. 3 guesses who owns it." Yarborough said nothing. but his face darkened. More vehicles arrived, including the sheriff himself. He took in the scene. The nearly averted catastrophe, the rescued wolf dog, the evidence of wildlife crimes and attempted mass poisoning. His expression hardened as Owen laid out the proof. No more room for political maneuvering or looking the other way. "Get him up," the sheriff ordered, gesturing to Yarborough. Two deputies moved in to replace the zip tie with proper handcuffs. "Clint Yarborough, you're under arrest for attempted poisoning, conspiracy, and multiple wildlife crimes. You have the right to remain silent." As they led Yarborough away, Calder noticed Stuart Penn was conspicuously absent. The county health officer who had helped orchestrate so much of the cover-up was nowhere to be found. Someone would track him down eventually, but for now, he'd apparently chosen to cut and run. Tess touched Calder's arm. "Your eyes," she said softly. They were red and irritated from the phosphine exposure. His lungs felt like they'd been scraped raw. "I'll live," he assured her, though he knew they'd both need medical attention. "How's our friend?" He nodded towards the Azepand. "Crated wolf dog. Calming down." The tarp helped, gave him a dark space to feel secure in. She smiled tiredly. "He's going to need rehabilitation, but he'll make it." The storm that had raged for so long was finally beginning to ease. Rain still fell, but the savage wind was dying down, and the thunder had moved off to the east. Emergency lights painted everything in shifting colors as statements were taken, and evidence was catalogued. Calder stood steady despite his exhaustion, answering questions and explaining events. His professional reputation would need rehabilitation too, but the truth had come out. That was what mattered. Owen approached, notebook in hand. "You two should get checked out by the EMTs," he said gruffly, but his eyes showed concern. "Got enough evidence here to bury Yarborough and his whole operation. Might even be enough to force a federal investigation into the development scheme." "What about the clinic?" Calder asked. "My suspension. After this?" Owen snorted. "They'll be begging you to come back. Town needs a vet who puts truth before politics." Tess leaned against Calder's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. They watched the emergency teams work, securing the scene and making it safe. The wolf dog whined softly from its crate, but the sound was more tired than frightened now. The sun wasn't visible through the clouds, but the quality of light was changing as dawn approached. The storm was passing, literally and figuratively. There would be consequences and complications to deal with, but the immediate danger was over. "Come on," Calder said to Tess. "Let's get you warm and dry." They made their way carefully down from the catwalk, supporting each other. The EMTs were waiting with blankets and oxygen masks. Around them, the machinery of justice was grinding into motion. Evidence being photographed, statements recorded, charges filed. Yarborough sat in the back of a patrol car, his expression unreadable. His lawyer would fight, of course, but the physical evidence was overwhelming. The barrel numbers, the rope fibers, the footage from the tunnel, the wolf dog's tracking chip, it all formed an unbreakable chain. The remaining barrel of phosphine was safely neutralized and contained. Hazmat technicians gave the all-clear signal, though they continued to monitor the air quality. The sluice gates were closed, the water level returning to normal. Nature itself seemed to be settling back into its proper rhythm as the rain softened to a gentle patter. Medical personnel checked Calder and Tess for chemical exposure, shining lights in their eyes and listening to their lungs. The prognosis was good. They'd need treatment for the gas exposure, but there would be no lasting damage. The wolf dog, too, was examined through the bars of its crate, its vital signs strong despite the ordeal. "What happens now?" Tess asked, her voice muffled by an oxygen mask. "Now?" Calder managed a tired smile. "Now we rest, heal, and make sure justice is served. Then we get back to work. There are always more animals that need help." She squeezed his hand, understanding perfectly. They had stood together against corruption and won. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way, with truth, compassion, and unwavering determination to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The morning continued to brighten as emergency vehicles began to depart, their work done. The dam stood solid and unchanged, the crisis averted. In the distance, birds began their dawn chorus, welcoming another day, one that, thanks to their efforts, would be safer for all creatures, wild and domestic alike. Dawn painted the county courthouse steps in soft gold as Calder watched Clint Yarborough, stripped of his expensive boots and signature swagger, being led inside for booking. The cattleman's shoulders slumped under the weight of orange prison garments, a far cry from his usual tailored attire. 2 deputies flanked him, their faces set with professional detachment. Inside, the booking process moved with mechanical efficiency. Fingerprints, mugshot, paperwork. Yarborough's empire was crumbling in real time, and the morning news carried an even bigger bombshell. Dr. Stuart Penn had tendered his immediate resignation as county health officer. Sources indicated he was already cooperating with prosecutors, trading information for leniency. Rats and sinking ships, Owen remarked, standing beside Calder as they watched Penn's office being boxed up by investigators. Amazing how fast loyalty evaporates when indictments start flying. Calder nodded, his throat still raw from the gas exposure. Did they recover the records he seized from my clinic? Every last file, Owen confirmed. Found them in his home safe, along with some very interesting financial documents linking him to Yarborough's development schemes. The DA's having a field day. The sun climbed higher as Calder made his way to the emergency clinic board meeting. His hands were steady as he presented his case. The evidence, the rescue, the prevention of what could have been a catastrophic poisoning. The board members, many of whom had voted for his suspension, now sat in uncomfortable silence. Dr. Martha Chen, the board chair, cleared her throat. In light of recent events and the exemplary way you handled this crisis, we are unanimously voting to reinstate your license, effective immediately. She paused, meeting his eyes. You lived up to your oath when it mattered most, Dr. Hutton. The clinic is yours again. Relief washed over him, but Calder kept his composure. Thank you. I'll be reopening this afternoon. Outside the boardroom, Tess waited, her arms still bandaged from their struggle on the catwalk. Her smile was bright enough to chase away the last shadows of doubt. I hear we've got our vet back. We do, he agreed, allowing himself to return her smile. Though I could use a hand getting the clinic back in order. They walked together through town, where the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. People who had avoided eye contact days ago now nodded in greeting. The truth had a way of changing perspectives. At the Federal Wildlife Station just outside town, they stopped to check on their unexpected catalyst. The wolf dog, now officially dubbed Sprig for his resilient spirit, was recovering well. DNA tests had confirmed what Tess had suspected. He was part of a protected recovery line, his existence alone enough to trigger federal protection for the entire watershed. The wildlife officer, Sarah Martinez, showed them to his enclosure. He's going back to protected range tomorrow, though I have to say, he's got quite the fighting spirit, like a spring that just keeps bouncing back. Sprig's amber eyes tracked them through the fence, alert but calmer now. The matted coat that had fooled them initially was clean and brushed, revealing the distinctive markings of his heritage. He stood, stretched, and moved closer to the fence where Calder and Tess watched. Thank you, Tess whispered to the wolf dog. You helped us stop something terrible. Back at the clinic, Calder unlocked the doors for the first time since the evacuation. The hazmat teams had cleared everything, but there was still work to be done to get back to normal operations. Tess rolled up her sleeves without being asked, helping him reorganize supplies and return equipment to its proper place. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the routine tasks allowing their minds to process everything that had happened. Finally, Tess spoke. You know, I'm going to need a new place to rehabilitate wildlife. My old shed is pretty much destroyed. Calder looked up from the cabinet he was restocking. The clinic has that unused barn out back. Good ventilation, separate entrance, could be converted. Are you offering me space, Doctor Hutton? I'm offering you partnership, he said quietly, in whatever form you want that to take. Tess set down the box she was carrying and moved closer. I'd like that. All of it. She touched his arm, gentle where bruises from the fight were still healing. No grand gestures needed. Just this. Us. Building something real. The afternoon light streamed through the clinic windows as they stood together, both a little battered but standing stronger for it. Outside, life in the small town was returning to its rhythm. The storm had passed, justice was being served, and here in this quiet moment, two people who had faced the worst together were choosing to face everything else the same way. There was still work to be done. Statements to file, testimonies to prepare, a clinic to fully restore. The media would eventually descend, wanting statements about corruption and heroism. Federal investigators would need their help building cases against both Yarborough and Penn. But for now, they had this moment of peace. Calder began setting up for the afternoon appointments that would surely come. Tess moved around the space with growing familiarity, already sketching plans for the barn's conversion. They worked in sync, passing supplies and sharing small smiles, the rhythm of it as natural as breathing. "The next storm will come," Tess said as she helped him prep an exam room. "They always do out here." "True," Calder agreed, checking his instruments. "But we'll face it together this time. All of it." She nodded, understanding everything he wasn't saying. They had earned this quiet victory, this chance to build something honest from the ground up. No fanfare needed. Just the simple truth of two people choosing each other, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The afternoon sun warmed the clinic's walls as they settled into their new normal. Outside, life moved forward. Yarborough faced justice, Penn would answer for his crimes, and somewhere in the protected range, a resilient wolf dog named Sprig would soon run free. Here, in this moment, in this place they had fought to protect, Calder and Tess began their own journey forward, not with grand declarations, but with the quiet certainty of having found solid ground at last. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.